I'd like to introduce you Anna Ikiara. I know her already. I think 2007, and
Yes.
then I met her. Anna, you remember maybe 2007. You were the
Yes.
manager of Nairobi, and
Yes.
I wanted to start the same program, the same concept in Addis.
Yeah.
Still, we have contact, and it's nice that we can now introduce you to the Goa School. And I'd like to give the floor to you. I know you are a generalist. You are an author, you are a manager, you are an entrepreneur, you are a social advocate. So I don't speak too much. And in the meanwhile, I'll try to have video contact. But I think the most important is that you do your presentation. So please go ahead, Anna.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Lenza. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Okay. Shall I go on? I don't.
Yes, go on. And
Yes.
then later we can have questions. Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Lenza. Today I'm wearing my advocacy and hat. So Lenza has introduced me very well. My name's Ikiara, and I have the pleasure of making a presentation to you today. I want us to talk about two things, exploitation and exclusion. These are the terrible two. And of course, I want us to get into what we can do about it. So today I feel very, very privileged to speak to the Goa School because one thing is that young people have got more time than the rest of us to influence the trajectory of development of the developing countries, to which India and Africa are. And that's where, of course, my presentation is about. For me, it's a great honor to be able to extend my life for once, because talking to young people means then ordinarily they'll outlive me, so they will continue to influence the continent even beyond the life that I shall live. So I was given the liberty to choose what to speak about today, and I chose to speak about development of the global south and the intervening factors that have influenced both the Indian subcontinent and the African continent, and what young people can do about it. It's a tough subject, so be open-minded, and it's not possible to do justice to it in just 40 minutes. So what I want to do today is to open up our minds and provoke our thinking and on what our role should be going forward in the development of our two beloved continents. So just things that happened in the last couple of years that have jogged my mind is the advent of COVID-19 and the attitude of the West in the anticipated effects on the global South. I think we all remember that many of the Westerners really said terrifying things about what they anticipated would happen in the developing world, owing to our lack of advancement in the medical field. And of course, when the vaccines came, the life-saving vaccines, we know that the West took so much more than they needed, leaving the developing world really in a terrified state, wondering what would happen to them because of what was anticipated to happen with COVID-19. And then it's also always bothered me that the developing countries are not following the trajectory of development that was followed by the West. We seem to be lagging behind 60 years after most of us have obtained independence. And these two issues have really occupied my mind, and they have led to deep reflection on the reasons. So to understand why we are the way we are, maybe we need to look a little bit at the history of the continents. And wonder why things are the way they are. So some of the things that would help us understand why we are here is to really understand our history. And that is what I want to dive in today just a little bit, and then ask you a lot of questions that will help you probably think through it, because it's not possible to do justice in just 40 minutes. So one of the questions that I really would like to understand, and I would like you to think through, is why do we know so little about the developing world before the coming of the white people? India and both India and African continent, of course, was colonized with very few exceptions. And then why do we know very little before then? And then why are current people the most disrespected and looked down upon race in the world? And why is everything good associated with white and everything bad or negative associated with black or colored? I know, we have Christian faith here, and angels are always white, but the devil is always black. And we know about the white list and the black list. If you're black Christian, you are in the ranks, and if you are white Christian, then why is that? Why not the other way around? And then probably most relevant for this meeting is that despite having most of the world sought after resources like minerals and even agricultural products in the developing worlds, we are still poor 5 or 6 decades after independence. Why is that? Because if you want, for example, Africa is home to 30% of the minerals that are needed by the world. And we also have a very able population, but still we are lagging behind in development. Why is it that? Why is it like that? And why does the developing world export our raw materials cheaply to the West and then import finished products at exorbitant prices? And how come there is a thriving, for example, second-hand market of clothes coming from the West to the developing world? That's just one of them. And if I ask you, the best chocolate, where does it come from? You'll tell me it comes from Switzerland. But if you go to Switzerland, where are the cocoa fields? Why are the cocoa fields in Africa, in the Western Africa region? And why, for example, is the chocolate that is the best coming from Switzerland? Why is that? And then why is most of the African countries with the greatest wealth in terms of commodities needed by the West always at war? That's something we should all think about. Like the DRC Congo in the East African region, and many countries in the West where we find gold and the rest of and titanium and most of the other resources needed by the West. Why are they always at war? Just a question. And how come there are many Westerners owning resources in terms of land and minerals and even contracts to build infrastructure in developing countries? And why is the reverse not true or even possible? And then one other thing is, why are we so divided? And why do we not look out for each other the way the white race does? Why do we, for example, hate ourselves to the point that if I want to win a contract in my mother country, I come from Kenya, I would stand a better chance if I had a white person as my business partner, even when I am dealing with people as black as me. And then in the first place, another question that I want to jog your mind, because we don't have time to answer all these questions. Why Europeans came to Africa and the developing world to get natural resources and free labor, of course, from the inhabitants? But why did the developing world then soon after independence become a poor end receiving continent or continents? And how come that whenever we go, white people are always synonymous with power and privilege, and current people are the poorest in the world, including in the USA, the richest country in the world? And how come continents with most of the resources is always receiving aid? Why is aid necessary when trustworthy statistics have it that for every $1 leaving the developing world, there are 10 others. $1 coming into the developing world, there are 10 others leaving the continents through unfair debt conditionalities, tax havens, unfair trade practices, exploitation of labor, and the inhabitants of developing countries. Why do we need aid if it only accounts for 1% and we lose 10%? That's the question. Maybe to help us answer some of those questions, which we can do briefly in the short time remaining, it should be noticed that the history of the global South with the rest of the world has always been one of exploitation and abuse. The Spanish and the Portuguese had been using African slaves since the 16th century. And then this was taken a notch higher by the Atlantic slave trade in the 18th century, and was a new kind of cruelty, of course, and scale with the Atlantic slave trade, where 12 million Africans were forcibly removed from Africa and exported across the Atlantic to the Caribbean island and the American continent. And then, of course, consequently, most of the adverse effects were on the enslaved people, but there were also effects on the African communities, like diseases, depopulation, poverty. Ultimately, the widespread attitude of racism and contempt for Africans and other peoples of color. That was the result of the exploitation. But let's look at a little bit at the history before the coming of white people in Africa. And the Berlin Conference, of course, of 1885. So a once powerful African continent with well-established education and religious systems, chopped up like pieces of pie into some of the smallest economies we have seen in Africa today. This was all by design in order to divide and conquer Africa and leave it truly defeated and a dominated continent. This situation for African continent lasted until the 1960s, when most African continents got their independence. Then let's mirror that to the history of India, because that is where most of you are. Both Africa and India, of course, have similar landscape and colonial and development history. Though the Portuguese presence in India initially started in 1498, their colonial rule lasted from 1505 until 1961. There was competition between the Dutch and the British, and then colonialism had, of course, many effects on India as follows. The exploitation of natural resources and labor, destruction of traditional industries, the annexation of territories and loss of sovereignty, and the disruption of traditional social systems and values, and the suppression of indigenous cultures, among other undesirable effects. Colonialism, developing world's resources were exploited during colonialism. I think I stand corrected. I haven't been to India, but if you look at the railway lines, they come from the interior. I don't know if that is true of India, but I can bet it is. The railway lines were always built from the interior to the coastline, of course, to exploit and export resources. And then colonialism was, of course, proved to be very cruel towards indigenous people, bringing about slavery, brutality, and death. And then, of course, there is no mistaking that colonialism was unfavorable to nations affected and severely limited any room for economic or cultural growth. Then after independence, both continents were politically free and politically free in quotes, but economically the exploitation of these countries' resources continued, and I dare say continues to date. So efforts to subdue developing countries, even after independence, included exploitative endeavors like disguised into foreign policy. For example, very concerted efforts to make sure that they don't unite as continents through elimination of advocacy. I'm sure you know many of the Africans leaders that advocated for unity, like Patrice Lumumba, were overthrown. I'm not sure about India, but that is true of Africa. Kwame Nkrumah, all those people, they were murdered. And then, of course, signing of loop-sided treaties that made sure that those formerly colonized states were never going to be economically independent, especially French colonies. And some of those, you can do your research, some of those, those treaties stand up to date. And there were severe consequences for those that declined, like Algeria, like Mali, like Guinea-Bissau. The colonizers left them as they left, they destroyed the infrastructure and effectively wrote the obituaries of those continents, of those nations. And some of the agreements are alive to date. Other exploitative endeavors, of course, include support to developing countries out of poverty, neocolonialist tendencies that have a new form of economic colonialization, colonialism, and then continued conditional aid, where African countries are told you either do this or we don't give you aid. And then what they do, of course, destroys the economy. I'm sure we know about the structural adjustment programs of the 80s. I'm sure we can say so much about, which ended up in impoverishing many of the countries and further exposing their resources to exploitation. And then, of course, we now have liberalization, which further opened up the resources for developing countries to further exploitation. And then, of course, there is liberalization, and now we have globalization. All these policies, you need to study them on your own and see what effect they have had on the continents of developing continents. And then that is so much complaining, but what can we do about it? Because I think the reason we are here is to try and salvage the developing and take, especially for you young people, to take charge and make sure that in your lifetime that we see a developed global south. So what can we do? We can learn our own history, because we never did really. The most of the history that I learned up to the university was history of other continents. We never really dived into who we really are and why we are the way we are. So I think we need to learn our own history. We have been led to believe that our continents consist of jungles, savages, carnivores, and nothing civilized. And we have internalized this and we hate ourselves. Well, the truth is, the history will set us free, because we had our own education. The first university ever was in Timbuktu. And we've been made to believe that we were brought education and we were civilized by what happened to us during colonialism. That could never be further from the truth. And then we also need to decolonize our minds, because we have been called savages until we have believed it. But you see, I think savagery behavior is more to the person who roots and rapes than the person who is rooted and raped. So I think young people also, number 3, need to get involved in the running of our own respective countries. It is easy to complain about things, like I have done all morning. But the best thing for you to do is to get involved in finding solutions. You know, how many young people run for government positions, leadership positions? I think we need to do that. And with the knowledge that we have acquired from history and studying the economies of our countries and global politics, then we should be able to question what our governments are doing. So yes, you heard me right. You need to join government, because that is where decisions are made. On top of that, you need to join country and regional international advocates for the cause of your continent, both African and Indian continents. the African Union, I don't know what you have equivalent in India, but you need to join those movements so that you make your voice heard as a critical mass of young people living in the global south. And then you need to put pressure on your governments to review all infrastructural building, mining contracts, and other loop-sided deals between them and Western countries. I know I can say the same so much about our continent, Kenya. I don't know any African country that has their airport or their railway line being made by Africans. But Africans have capabilities to do that work. Why can't they get those contracts and keep the money in the global south rather than exporting our resources? Debt cancellation of all pre- and post-colonial debt owed, in quotes, by the West, to the West by our continents. This should include all loop-sided ones by the Bretton Woods institutions. You know, I had my president complaining the other day that if an African country wants a loan, we are charged 10 times more than if a Western country wants a loan. Why is that? Why is that? When many of the African countries have never defaulted on the payment of aid. And I'm sure I can say the same for India. And then payment of reparations for both continents for atrocities committed against them by colonial governments. I've seen Kenyans go to Britain to plead their case because I never saw my grandparents and some of my uncles on both sides of the family because my community fought for independence. So many of those people were either shot to death or starved to death, or conditions were made too difficult for them to survive. And we were never paid for compensated for that. Instead, we are blamed for not being development conscious. So I think we should claim reparations for what was done to our people, and also the siphoning of our resources. And then back home, we should insist that developing countries should unite and negotiate as a bloc to the world, because it's obvious. Divided we fall, united we stand. At the individual level, we should use and promote what is uniquely ours. I like the culture of the Indians, because you wear your clothes and you have retained many of your traditions. But in the African continent, we've been unable to do that. We value so much what is Western and despise what is unique to us. I think that attitude should change. There's no good or bad culture. All cultures are the same, and they serve the humanity that they are meant to serve equally. And then, in conclusion, I'll end with a quote from Mark Twain as follows: "In the beginning of a change, the patriot is scarce, is a scarce man, and brave, and hated and scorned. When his cause succeeds, the timid join him. For then, it will cost nothing to be patriotic." So I'm asking all of us, are we patriotic in the beginning, or do we wait to join the patriots later? Thank you very much.
Very good, Anna. Thank you. That was a long story.
Welcome.
Long story.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Applause. Yes. Get other questions at the moment?
Yeah, sure. May I ask one, Lindsay? This is Madhuri.
Madhuri, yes. Okay,
Well,
go ahead.
It's more like a bunch of observations, and I first of all want to say thank you, Anne. I mean, this has been really something for all of us to think about. You know, in India, there are many forms of exclusion and exploitation. I think some of the biggest ones are like the big differences between the very rich and the very poor. It's quite startling in India when you see that. And of course, the rich tend to build. I mean, they tend to build their wealth off the backs of poor people. I mean, I think this is the same story all over the world, right? And of course, we live in a country where the constitution bans all forms of exclusion and exploitation. But there are some things that we still have to worry about. I mean, for example, we can ask ourselves about, for example, domestic servitude. A lot of us have help who work in the house. And this is a normal way of being for Indians, right? For many, many, many Indians. And then, what type of labor contracts do we have with them to give them time off? What is our relationship with them? Do we treat them as humans, as part of our family? Some people do, some people really don't. And this can be extended back to the farm systems as well.
Yeah.
Something called, this is all illegal, by the way, but like Begar is something where um, people are forced to work for very little money on farms and in labor situations. This is very, very exploitative. Then you have, for example, the situation of women, and you have forced marriage, you have the fact, sexual exploitation. It happens within marriages, it happens outside of marriage. In North India, for example, women are raped just to punish somebody for, maybe as a punishment, So maybe there's been a fight between two families, so they just come and, rape women. And then you have this caste and class system in India, which means that within India, we are all divided by caste and class. And so there will be people who will go out and rape women of a certain lower caste society simply because they're available. And they don't have facilities. So, for example, they will be going out to use toilets in the open, and this is when they are attacked by men. So, I mean, it's impossible to say. We have organ harvesting. I mean, there are people there's stories in the news about people being so poor that they have to sell their organs. And there is an exploitation racket around this where people from the West come to get high quality medical sort of service from India. But you don't know where are they getting these organs from? Probably from poor people who are selling off an extra kidney or something in order to survive. So, I mean, it's impossible for us to kind of share with you the levels of exploitation and exclusion that we have in India. But just to say that we are extremely touched by what you've been saying, because, we live it, albeit in a different way, here too. And if one reads, and this is for the Goa School Fellows, and you will find that it is the same story in the Americas before they got there, in Latin America certainly, Australia, So in different parts of the world, there is an oppressor and an oppressed. This leads to all kinds of politics. In fact, if you look at the politics in our country today, it is all about a certain minister who has lost his seat in parliament because he's accusing another person of another very rich businessman of having a nexus with our politicians. And he's like one of the richest people in the world. And so, exclusion and exploitation is therefore at the foremost of everything almost that we do. And for a lot of us youngsters in India, what I've seen is that we just try and put our heads down. I was the same, right? Just put your head down, get a good job, try and get rid of the poverty that has been in the family, and just try to move ahead. Open your mind as much as you can, learn, of course, but at the end of the day, it's about just escaping that poverty and not really participating in building something new, which is the loveliest part of your presentation, I feel, today. So I really want to compliment you on that, which is you're saying join government, you're saying, figure out how to build a new country. And for a lot of us who are just trying to escape poverty, that is a pretty big ask. But hopefully these are things that, we will put our mind to. Lindsay, I've gone on for a bit. I'm sorry, I tend to jabber a lot. But how much time do we have? And maybe you'd like to open up the floor to others as well.
Okay. Anna, I also have a question for you.
Yes.
Because you are talking a lot about exclusion and exploitation, but
Yes.
here in the Netherlands, for instance, we are talking about inclusion,
Yes.
diversity. So I was
Yes.
thinking, is that the right way? Or because you made an analyze now, but how can we change? We can
Yes.
talk a lot. This is also a talk program, but most important is that we are going to do something. And then I think the inclusion, diversity is a good concept. What do you think?
Yes, indeed, Lenz, I completely agree with you that we need to be positive and we need to talk about inclusion. But from where I come from, it's important to recognize why there is exclusion, why there is exploitation in the first place. Because for you to be able to understand a problem, you need to understand where it is coming from. That is one problem I have with modern medicine, because you see, you can end up treating the symptoms of a problem or the symptoms of an issue without understanding where the problem came from. For example, there are many efforts, even at the workplace, to become inclusive, where, okay, we say, this is a diverse organization. And then you just probably you want to become diverse by recruiting a Black person among our whole office full of white people. But then you just give me an office in the corner and you call it inclusive.
No.
For
No.
you to be, for me to be truly belong, there's so much that needs to happen. For example, I need to earn as much salary as everyone else. My culture needs to be appreciated. So when I come with my natural air like this, if you say it is unprofessional, then that's already excluding me. So that's why I'm saying we need to understand where did that come from, the exclusion and the exploitation and the looking down on Black and color and people of color. Where did it come from? Then we can come up with solutions, and that is why we can go to inclusion. When we have identified how we came where we are, and then we find the solutions to the problems that currently obtain. So all of them, it is just a chicken egg situation. But from where I sit, I need to understand why we are here to be able to know how to go forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand. Maybe a next talk can be about inclusion and diversity. It's about, it's not my business, but maybe it's a good follow-up.
Yes.
But another question is maybe about Africans. When you read papers and you read articles in the media, it's always rather negative. Huh?
Yes.
What do you think? I hear. But I hear also positive stories, and then I think, what are the strengths of the Africans? Huh? What is the strength?
Yeah, the strength of
Yeah? You understand?
there's so much in the continent that is positive. Lenz, let me if I come to Holland,
yes, you're welcome.
there are people, there are people who beg on the streets, right? Are there beggars on the streets?
What are there?
Beggars. Are there people who beg
No,
on the
not
streets?
a lot. No, a few. Yeah.
A few that beg on. A few there are there. So if I take a snapshot of those few that beg on the streets and write a story about them in the Kenyan media, is that a representation of what happens in Holland?
Yeah, okay.
It's not. So I think what the Western media does, it's the same. It's a continuation of colonialism, and giving Africans a negative face, even Indians a negative face. So the foreign media will come here and they will pick something like that, either in India or Africa, and write about it. So when I come to Holland, for example, or when I travel, people ask me, where did you learn English and how come you wear clothes? Because they will always show people on the streets who are naked and who cannot even who cannot I mean, there is everyone, like every society has people like those. So it depends on what the media, the Western media, likes to portray Africans as.
Okay.
And I think we are yet to decolonize our minds, because we have been made to belittle ourselves to a point where we don't question. So we agree that indeed we are inferior when we shouldn't, because all humanity is equal.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? I don't know. I cannot see who is in on the screen. I see Anna. I saw Madhuri.
Yeah, so Lindsay,
Oh yeah. We almost have to finish, I think, eh?
we have about just under 2 minutes left. We have Melvin and Nadia that are also here. So Nadia is one of our fellows, and Melvin is interning with us.
Oh yeah. Hello. Good
Hi
afternoon.
everyone.
Melvin, is that Melvin?
Yeah,
No.
Melvin. This is
No,
Nadia.
I'm Nadia here.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Melvin. Good afternoon.
Oh, there you are.
Afternoon.
It's very dark. Yeah, okay.
It's
Are there
very
any
nice.
questions at the moment? Melvin, do you have questions?
No, I'm okay for now. I'm just learning.
Oh, landing. Okay.
Learning.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, that's true. I also learn every day. You are right. Yeah, it's very important. Yeah. Are there other issues at the moment, Anna, from your side, maybe? Because you also talked a lot about India. I have been several times in India. I think there's a big difference between India, the continent, the country, and your country, Kenya, in Africa. But yeah.
Yeah, but we have the same colonial history. We have the same. Yeah,
that's true. By the British.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we just have less than a minute left.
Okay.
So
we have to finish.
Yeah, we don't have any questions, but Annie, it was such a really very interesting topic, and you brought up so many things to think about. So thank you very much for that. Really
welcome.
Okay.
My pleasure.
Okay, have a good day.
Okay, bye.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much.
And see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye.